All right. Sorry about the coming here. I was waiting for another very large file to finish uploading. So, thank you so much, all of you who are joining us to questions and answers about goldfish. So, this is actually a very fortuitously timed live session because I have literally had nothing but goldfish this week. So, I've had a lot of fresh cases and a lot of really great chats with owners that I'm happy to share with you live folks. So, maybe you can, save your fish from the fate that some of these fish are having. So, starting off, I'd really like to tackle some of a big, meaty topic, which is goldfish buoyancy disorders. We have a lot of information on our website. I know we've done other sessions about goldfish, but we see a lot of goldfish with buoyancy disorders. So, what exactly is a buoyancy disorder? So, essentially, a goldfish, given their anatomy and physiology, should be able to maintain themselves in the middle of the water column. And if they float up to the surface and say can't swim down, this is called a positive buoyancy disorder. And if they're on the bottom and can't swim to the surface, this is a negative buoyancy disorder. So we get a lot of people calling our office saying that their fish has swim bladder disease, which is not really that specific. Goldfish being, again, essentially just tiny carp, have a two-chambered swim bladder that is responsible for maintaining their buoyancy. So essentially, this is an air-filled container um, that will keep them, again, within the water column. If you're a diver or know someone who dives, this is the same as a buoyancy compensation device. So, goldfish are physostomous fish, which means they have a duct between their esophagus and their swim bladder that allows them to suck in air at the surface and push that into their swim bladder. So, a lot of owners will be concerned if they see their goldfish, gasping for bubbles at the surface. This, along with going to the bottom of the tank and picking up sand or pebbles to kind of swish them around in the mouth and get all the tasty bits out, this foraging behavior is completely normal. And sometimes some goldfish suck in a lot of extra air, and you sometimes see the bubbles escape along the sides of their operculum. Again, this is just a normal behavior. Some goldfish will like to suck bubbles just for no other reason because they can. Sometimes we think it's boredom or maybe even stress. Um, but yeah, so saying your fish has swim bladder, that's just saying like, yeah, I have kidney. It's not anything specific. And swim bladder disorders can be caused by many, many, many different things. So the most common issue we have with fish and their swim bladders is actually stress from poor water quality. So in these instances, the fish really doesn't have a buoyancy disorder. They just feel miserable. And if you've ever been sick and you're not feeling that well, you're not really gonna wanna do anything. You're gonna lie around, you're gonna be lethargic. I mean, some goldfish, you need to swim a little bit with propulsion in order to get swimming around. So a lot of fish that, suspect they have, swim bladder disease are really just sick from poor water quality. A lot of the times, and we'll be discussing this more in the live section, is inappropriate diet. So if you have, say, a tank that has a lot of goldfish in it and feeding is few and far between, especially if it's, going to be all the fish coming to the surface at once, there might be a vigorous feeding frenzy where everyone gets the mouthfuls that they can. And again, during that procedure, they might have sucked in a little bit of extra air, and then they'll go whoop and float at the surface after feeding time. So with that, it's actually fairly easy to fix that. Usually you want to just try to limit competition during feeding time. Definitely spread out the food if you can. And you might have to feed, a little bit less, but more frequently throughout the day. So the fish, don't all have to panic for the food at one time of day. And definitely feed a diet that's going to sink down a little bit, because again, that will just kind of disperse it throughout the water column. That will help with competition. and B, it will make sure that your fish all have, the room and the space to feed comfortably without being super stressed out. And then, unfortunately, when it comes to fancy goldfish, so there are two, varied types of goldfish. You have your standard traditional comet goldfish with a very long body, normal forked tail, no extra fins, no wen. These guys, again, these are the what we call feeder goldfish that you can usually typically pick up at a pet store. And then we have all the fancy varieties. So these are fish that have been bred with other goldfish that, start looking a little weird. Some of them have very short compressed bodies. Sometimes, the spine's going to be super wonky. The big orandas with that wen on their head. This is just a normal genetic mutation. It's actually a type of benign tumor that the epithelial cells have developed. It doesn't hurt the fish in any way, shape, or form. It just makes them look a little bit odd. And then you add this with big eyeballs popping out with, say, the Moore and the telescope varieties and the forked tails or the double tails. Unfortunately, these fish are very pretty, but not all the time are they going to be set up to be, structurally sound for the rest of their life. So we do unfortunately see buoyancy disorders in fancy goldfish a lot more frequently. Now, that's not to say that all fancy goldfish will have buoyancy disorders, but it's certainly they're at a higher risk just given their overall structured anatomy. Again, the standard comet goldfish is going to have a 2-chamber swim bladder, but with most fancies, they're only going to get one. And sometimes the duct between the esophagus and their swim bladder can be severely shortened. And in that case, it's a lot easier for air to get trapped into the swim bladder and therefore making them positively buoyant. Or they just don't have enough swim bladder for, the giant head or the giant tail, and it makes them be negatively buoyant. And sometimes these fish will actually have additional air in their GI tract that will, that they're trying to suck in air to get positively buoyant, and there's no swim bladder to put it in. The swim bladder is maxed out. So again, it's a little bit harder for some of those fancy varieties. We do get questions quite a bit about how do you fix these fish for the positively buoyant fish. So these fish that are up, stuck at the surface. Really, the first thing we're going to do is if there's, any air ulcerations, anything like that, we want to make sure that the fish stays moist. Fish don't do well being dry. So the easiest thing to do is actually take a sheet of bubble wrap and put it over, half to 3/4 of your aquarium surface. And that way it'll trap the water between the fish. It'll float on the surface and therefore your fish will still stay wet. Obviously, you want to keep this away from any filter outflows because you want to make sure oxygen's still mixing into the tank. And then you, again, want to look at feeding a sinking diet. Again, just take it into nature, their physostomousness. We want to make sure that, they're actually going down to the bottom to make sure that, they're not sucking air at the surface. If your fish is seriously, you've tried these things, not making any progress, that's really the time that you're going to need to get a veterinarian out there to do either some sort of procedure or surgery to make sure that they are comfortable and not stuck at the surface. Since these fish, fish are prey animals. So being stuck at the surface is extremely stressful for them because they think something's going to come along and grab them and eat them. So with our buoyancy disorders, I'd really rather see a negatively buoyant fish than a positively buoyant because those guys just tend to do a lot better. So for the reverse now, if you have a negatively buoyant fish, you want to encourage them to come to the surface and suck in a little bit of air. So that's when we're going to recommend the floating diets. Now, again, it depends on what brand you like and how much protein your little fish needs, how much they're swimming. Sometimes you might need to help them to the surface. So you just wash your hands really well and just gently coax them up. Usually if they notice there's food up there, they're going to be super excited. And then this is going to bring me to the point of those cute little airline backpacks that people make for fish. Please, I'm begging you, do not put those on your fish. The contact of whatever material you're using will actually erode the skin mucus, which fish need to stay healthy. So if that is continually to make in contact, it's actually going to cause penetrating ulcers into the bottom, into the body. And I've actually seen fish with holes poked through their skin because those little harnesses were on there too tightly. Sometimes we will try external fixation devices. These are not attached to the skin in any way. We actually use the fins themselves to try to lift the fish up and at least make them a little bit more comfortable. So then we always get the question of, is this a good way of life? Like, is this good quality of life for a little goldfish? Well, certainly it's not ideal, but if they are, say, within the environment, they have other fish that are interacting with them. If you, as the owner, are interacting with them, feeding them, changing up their environment, as long as they're eating and able to move around, it's okay if they scoot around on their belly. We've had several clients that, have perpetually negatively buoyant fish. And it can be a little distressing to people, but as long as that fish is eating and, can scoot around and move their body position, we're happy to kind of let them live out their little fishy lives. Unfortunately, again, with those fancies, they do tend to have a shorter lifespan. And unfortunately, a case that I had been managing for almost the last 18 months, a fish, let's see, she was a black Moor that something happened during spawning with her, and I suspect it was a traumatic injury, caused her to be negatively buoyant. And we tried everything to get her back to where she needed to be. Um, and the owners ended up moving to another part of the state. And when I last went out there, she hadn't been eating for a while. And we popped the ultrasound probe on there just to make sure everything was looking okay. And we actually found, unfortunately, a tumor in there. I don't know what type of tumor. The owner really wasn't that game. So unfortunately, yes, we do have tumors in goldfish fairly commonly. So that's another thing to look out for. And then with the diet things that we're going to talk about, we also have the lovely myth of goldfish being constipated. So I had a long discussion with another fish researcher this morning about this, and I hate that this myth is perpetuated so long, but freshwater fish cannot be physiologically constipated. There's just no way. So if you think of a fish in a freshwater aquarium, which goldfish are, again, freshwater, any animal that is in a environment that is less dense than their body, water is going to move into that fish just through the simple processes of osmosis. Obviously, if your fish continued to have that process, they would swell up like a water balloon, which happens when you have issues with either the kidneys or the gills. Now, those are responsible for getting rid of that excess body water, but it is an active process, whereas osmosis is passive. So, any freshwater fish, goldfish included, are always going to be overhydrated. So, there is no way that you can be constipated if you're overhydrated. They're just constipated is dry, crackly stools, which goldfish just do not have. Now, that's not to say they might not have GI motility issues. So, again, if your kidneys and gills are not working the way that they should, a goldfish's body is going to take on additional water. And that was going to be dispersed throughout all the different tissues. So, this could be between the scales, so in the skin itself. This is going to cause the dropsy or pine cone like appearance. And again, this isn't a disease, this is just organ malfunction. But if your body's taking on water and it ends up in the muscles of your GI tract, your GI system is just not going to be able to move food along as quickly. Now, in goldfish, they have a very simple gastrointestinal setup. They do not have an acidic stomach, so they really can't break down complex carbohydrates, such as a lot of fiber that we see. And again, once they've kind of crushed everything up, they have molars in the back of their jaw, so they'll crush up their pellets or their flakes. and everything is just very passively absorbed through the GI tract. It's not big and muscly like ours is, like your cat or your dog. It's a very simple GI tract. So again, if there's a lot of excess body water just because the kidneys and gills can't do their job, it can actually separate some of the muscle tissues in the GI tract and cause, things to not move as quickly. So I know we're getting lots of questions about indigestion in fish, which again is going to be a little bit of a misnomer in goldfish because their GI tract is not set up the same way. When it comes to digestion in all fish, including goldfish, water temperature is really going to play a critical role. So fish are ectotherms, which means that their internal metabolism, their immune function, their reproductive schedule is all based on water temperature. We can control our own body temperatures because we are endotherms. But fish, reptiles, amphibians, they are ectotherms. So the colder the water the fish is in, the lower their immune function, the lower their reproductive function, and the lower their metabolism. So again, that's just going to slow down movement through the GI tract. So sometimes, when it's really cold, especially when your fish is, say, in an outdoor pond versus an indoor one, um, their metabolism really isn't going to be cooking along compared to, say, at room temperature or 70, or if they're even in the 80 degrees, the intestine's going to be, moving things along fairly quickly. One study I'm actually hoping to complete this year is actually seeing how fast goldfish can move food through their GI system at various temperatures. So hopefully we'll be able to look at that later this year, and maybe I'll be able to give you an update. So with all these lovely GI functions comes the fun green pea myth. So I get it. It's on every single message board I have ever come across when if your fish is sick, stop feeding them protein, feed them a green pea, and all will be well. Well, it's not that cut and dry. Um, Green peas work, but probably not for the reasons that you're thinking. So compared to fish food, green peas are very, very low in protein. So if you're, say, having problems with your water chemistry and your nitrogen readings, your ammonia, nitrite, nitrate are very high. Obviously, if you switch that to a low protein diet, the fish isn't going to be producing as much ammonia. So it's going to help improve your water quality a little bit. It's also a sinking diet, which we talked about in the buoyancy disorders. So again, they got to go down and chase those little peas around. It's really, a good thing for them to get that sinking diet if they're, stuck at the surface or trying to eat very vigorously. And the third thing is that little pea, coming from the freezer that you probably just brought home from the store, compared to a container of food that's been sitting around for, 5, 6 months or longer, that pea is gonna have a lot more vitamins in it, which could be something that your fish was sorely lacking in their diet previously. So, again, peas are fine as a low-calorie treat, but they are not magic. They have no more fiber than regular fish food, and your fish can't digest extra fiber anyway. Goldfish, again, no acidic stomachs. So it's going to go in the front and come out the back the exact same way. So the second issue that we got a lot of questions about when people were submitting for this session was on feeding. So what should I feed my goldfish? I get it. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of goldfish foods out there on the market. And unfortunately, there's really no good way to determine how much exactly your fish will need. So for regular, cats, dogs, all of their feeding regimens is based on their weight. So any of you who own another pet, first thing you do when you get to the vet is you get a weight. And that will tell you, a lot about how that animal's health is. Are they overweight? Are they underweight? And then we have body condition scoring systems, which will basically look at the animal in, a few different spots on their body to determine, is there a little extra fat padding here? Is this caved in where it should be caved out? And we have these for, most species. Do we have them for goldfish? Kind of. The best thing that we have available was just published in Dr. Kat Hatfield and Dr. Lee Clayton's book on clinical fish medicine. And they, bless their souls, put a koi body condition scoring in there. So, koi, goldfish, they're kind of close enough. Again, this is for those long body ones. Those fancy ones, all bets are off for them. But with those, again, when was the last time you got to wait on your goldfish, let alone if you have multiple fish, you really don't want to have to keep taking them out to weigh them all the time. It's exceedingly stressful for them. So we don't know exactly how much to feed. Again, goldfish are a little bit better at self regulating. Not all, trust me, I've met some pig goldfish. Um, but really, what you want to do is, start with a little bit of feeding, see how they do. Goldfish in the wild, so these, wild carp cousins, they're used to, eating a little bit throughout the day. They're constantly foraging for food. So your goldfish's diet is really, just kind of like eating small meals throughout the day. They don't really do that well with one big meal all at once. But I get it. You guys have lives, you have other things to do. At least your goldfish is getting something. So again, if you're able to do multiple small feedings throughout the day, that is best. And again, it's going to be temperature dependent on how hungry your fish is. The warmer it is, the hungrier that they're going to be. So again, getting up there, you might have to increase their feedings to, twice a day if it's up above the 70s. Now, what type of food should you feed? Well, anyone who has flake food in there, unless your fish is an inch or less, they really should not be eating flakes. Flakes do not hold on to their nutrition very long because of their very high surface to mass ratio. So, vitamin C is a water soluble vitamin, and basically it will just evaporate off your flakes within about 3 to 4 months. So, I had a little goldfish yesterday eating flakes that were over a year old, and unfortunately was having some issues with just some secondary bacterial infections from the environmental bacteria that were around the tank, mostly because his immune system just wasn't doing that well. So we're going to get him on a new diet. We added a little bit of vitamin C to his tank to help him get started. But other than that, he should be good to go. So again, unless your fish is very, very small, and they make very tiny extruded diets these days, just because they say it's for a different species of fish. All fish diets basically have the same ingredients. The different things will change is the nutrition profile. So for goldfish, you really want to pay close attention to the protein levels and the fat levels. So for a maintenance diet for goldfish, so these are mature, adult, late juvenile goldfish, you want to choose a protein around 30 to 35%. For the fat, the lower the better. So you should probably stick to around 7 to 5%. Now, if you have a juvenile fish that is growing, they're going to need more protein, more fat because their body is still developing. This is an issue that we see a lot of the times with people who have bred their goldfish, maybe unintentionally, and weren't quite ready for the offspring. So, I mean, yes, I know you got the adult food on hand, but you really want to supplement that with a baby diet, or feed them completely separately. And then if you are getting ready to breed your goldfish, if you want to do that as part of your life, you want to make sure that those adults have extra protein and fat because it takes a lot of fat and protein to develop eggs, to develop sperm. And without that, again, at the maintenance level, there might be some reproductive activity, but it's really not on their radar overall. So, again, those were the big questions that we had as far as goldfish, considering buoyancy disorders and feeding. So hopefully I've answered those sufficiently. I know it's a lot of information coming at you, but again, I've had all these cases on hand. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to share that all with you. So if anybody has any other questions, I've been trying to keep an eye on them. Um, again, yes, so again, with our lovely little indigestion slash constipation, the causes are too varied for me to actually pick one and tell you, like, this is the be all end all. I wish medicine was that simple, but it can come down to environment, it can be genetics, it can be diet, it can be so many different things that is causing your fish to be stressed. Um, and especially, some fish have been kept in the lap of luxury since they were little. And if you are not up to par with the, lifestyle that they are used to, sometimes it can cause big issues for the fish. So yes, swim bladder issues can be genetics. They can be poor food or care. Um, it really depends on your individual fish. So foods recommended for goldfish, we kind of just went over that in a lot of detail. Um, there are, again, it depends on your fish. Again, I do tend to recommend the sinking diets just because it encourages their natural foraging behavior. Gel diets are fine if you want to take that under your wing. DIY, so kind of putting together your own fish diet takes a little bit more effort. Again, you're going to need to do a little bit more research about what normal goldfish diets look like, and there's really no such things normal for a lot of goldfish. If you're looking back at, say, their carp ancestry, so goldfish are descendants of Crucian carp. So this is, centuries and centuries ago. Somebody saw a nice, maybe a little lighter colored, not all the way brown carp, and put it in a special pond. And just over generations, that is how we have got the colors. And then, doing the crossbreeding for all those, other issues, so the wens, the tails, the short little hunched over bodies with terrible spines and no swim bladder, um, it can obviously affect, how different diets will affect them overall. So again, there are a bunch of fairly decent commercial diets out there. They are not all ideal. I wish there was one perfect diet, but it's really gonna depend on, A, what your fish likes. So again, it really depends. Some goldfish are just picky eaters. It happens, and sometimes, if they don't like the pellets, they only like the flakes. That's fine, but those flakes, you got to keep them fresh. And unfortunately, they do dissolve very quickly. So usually, you're going to have more issues with water chemistry. So again, high protein flake, as it breaks apart, that's going to cause more ammonia going into your system. So don't recommend it. Definitely stick with the pellets whenever possible. All right. Can old food lose nutrients? Old frozen food lose nutrients like dry food? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, old food is just not good for any animal, human. Unfortunately, I mean, some of those like super shelf stable vitamin C products that they make for humans, those aren't really going into pet fish foods. It's just unfortunately one of those limitations that they haven't really developed a super, awesome shelf stable vitamin C for a pellet for a fish. I wish it was different. And then we have question again, how much in frequency? The amount is almost, impossible to know because we're not actually able to weigh these fish, and there's no calorie count on on any product on the market. I really wish there was because that would help. You can do a general assessment by taking the nutritional program and plugging it into an online calculator. But really, it's going to depend on the more frequent feedings you can do, the better, because that just encourages the normal goldfish behavior. But I get people have lives, you have jobs, you're not able to, sit there with your fish and give them, a tiny pinch every couple hours. Um, so yeah, it's really going to vary quite a bit. And you have to have something that obviously is manageable for you and can keep your fish happy as well. And that's obviously going to depend on their temperature, their tank mates, their environment. If anybody really wants me to break down their tank specifically, we do have telehealth consults that I'm happy to, help you select the perfect diet, tell you, about how much to feed. Again, I I can't be exactly precise because again, we can't, get good weights and calorie counts because that's how everything else is determined. For us, for your cat or your dog, your metabolic intake is based on your weight. And again, if you have a tank full of goldfish, trying to get weights on every single one of them is just too stressful. So unless they're coming out for, say, a veterinary exam, something like that, that's a good time to, while they're already sedated for their full exam, you just pop them on the scale real quick, and then you'll be able to at least better determine the diet. But it really, again, depends on the fat and protein count, and that's going to vary widely in all the different diets. So again, I recommend a protein around 30 to 35% for a maintenance diet. If you have a juvenile or a reproductively active fish, obviously you're going to increase that. And the same for the fat, you want to be around 5 to 7%, a little bit higher if you are going to be, again, growing or reproducing. That's just the same with goldfish. So now we have a question about treats. We're just going to call all, veggies and krill and all that good stuff treats. So some treats are better than others. Obviously, those green peas that we talked about are perfectly fine, maybe once, maybe twice a week as a treat. But just like treats for us, for cats, for dogs, it should be an occasional thing. Unless you are completely crafting their diet from scratch, it's going to be a once or twice a week treat. So that includes nori sheets, that includes, just loose peas. If you're feeding any of the higher protein products like bloodworms, mysis, shrimp, again, these are treats. These are, you've been a good fish, you get a little something special. This is not something you get every single day. If you keep feeding goldfish high protein treats, they're going to keep growing larger and larger and larger, and you're going to have to keep getting bigger and bigger tanks. And then we have a questioning on fasting. You should never, ever fast a fish. I don't care what species they are, unless you have directions from a veterinarian, like the goldfish I have today that has a sand impaction. We are not going to be giving that food fish for only 2 days because, again, there's sand blocking his GI tract. So we literally don't want to push anything else in. But fasting days are not recommended. Essentially, you are an animal that is used to constantly eating and swimming around all the time. So, if you're going a day without food, that is very stressful on your body. So I do not recommend fasting your fish just for no reason at all. Again, sand impaction, that was verified with radiographs or x-rays. We actually saw the sand and all the air trying to move around it. That fish needs to be fasted because obviously we don't want to push more food in. But as just kind of a daily, or a weekly, let's just try it. No fasting. Just not a good idea. All right. So we are going to have more live almost said Zoom. Sorry, I've been Zooming all day with a bunch of other colleagues. Live YouTube sessions. We have koi coming up next month. I tried to make it the last Monday of the month to kind of keep some consistency. And then we have betta fish after that. So that will be the end of March. If there are any other species or topics that you would like me to cover, I am more than happy to. If you just want to hear an hour on goldfish buoyancy disorders, we already have a webinar for that. So it actually shows x-rays of fancy and normal goldfish, and you can see how their anatomy differs on x-rays. I love x-rays for buoyancy disorders because it shows us their spine and their swim bladder. So again, that swim bladder, that pocket full of air, is what keeps them neutrally buoyant. And air should only be in that chamber. It should not be in their GI tract, unless they are, again, very vigorous surface eaters. And their spine should be nice and straight. And if you go on that webinar and you look at some of these other goldfish, it's wonky. It goes all over the place. It's really amazing how some of these fish are even up and swimming at all. All right, question on tips for quarantine for new goldfish. So our quarantine protocol is pretty much standardized for any kind of fish that you might be bringing in. You're not going to like it, but it is a complete isolation for 4 to 6 weeks. They need to be completely isolated in their own tank. You can add a little bit of salt in there. That helps with their respiratory functions. It will decrease, the amount of parasites that they might be carrying, but it is critical that they stay isolated for 4 to 6 weeks. This time period is not pulled out of thin air. All the lovely research books that I've looked at, we look at all the viruses, all the bacteria, all the parasites that could possibly appear on your fish, and how long they need to incubate, and then how long that goes to show clinical signs. Because obviously, if a fish has one little parasite, it's not that big a deal. But if they're stressed out from transport being dropped in a new tank, maybe the water chemistry is different, they're not getting the same diet. Again, that's going to cause stress. And just like a stress response in us, in cats and dogs, that's going to lower your immune function. So that one little parasite is now suddenly able to replicate and thrive. So that's really why we want to keep these guys in quarantine. So when the thriving starts, they're not going to be infecting anybody else in that nice tank that you already have nice and maintained. So yes, I know it is a longer period than you wanted me to say, but doing that, 1-2 week, not going to cut it. And you really can't try to manipulate it with temperature. Obviously, if you try to crank the temperature get real high up and get the fish through quarantine faster, and then drop them back down to their normal tank temperature, this is going to allow things that were kind of lurking at other temperatures to again take advantage and start presenting. So you just got to be patient. I know nobody likes to do it. Nobody likes to hear me say it, but we have more resources on our website if you want to get our complete protocol and learn how to set up a proper hospital quarantine tank. Other than good care, is there anything you can do to lengthen a fish's lifespan? So that is a great question. When it comes to taking care of fish, it really comes down to their environment and their diet. So the environment includes making sure that their tank is appropriate for their body size, making sure that they have plenty of room, and making sure that their water chemistry is good, that you're doing your regular maintenance and your water changes. Um, so again, that's really the biggest issue that we see with fish is poor water chemistry. We get it. No fish comes with instruction manuals from the pet store. So it might not be something that you're even aware of you have to do in the first place. So yes, maintaining a good environment and making sure that you're feeding appropriately. And again, when it comes to goldfish, making sure that they are getting the correct diet that is fresh. So again, that vitamin C, that water soluble vitamin C is critical and it can evaporate from foods very, very quickly. And again, it depends on where you store your food too. So a lot of smaller bags are perfect for this because they are, have the little zipper seal at the top. They're opaque on the sides. But sometimes, maybe it's not in that little package for as long as you like. You get a rip or a tear in the side, or you're, say, sharing it with the outdoor fish and you have a little bag inside. You really want to make sure that food stays in a sealed container that is opaque. So again, having lots of light come into the container is not going to be good for the food. And make sure the temperature stays consistent. So again, this means no food storage outside. It all has to stay inside. Usually we recommend if you have a pantry or a cupboard with all your fish stuff. I mean, I have a pet, pantry in my house that has all my fish stuff and my cat stuff. And that's just where that stuff stays all the time. So definitely nothing outside like that. But yeah, best thing you can do for your fish to give them a long, healthy life is keep the water nice and clean, make sure the environment is appropriate, and feed them appropriately. But great question. It kind of simplifies everything that I tell my owners altogether. So we are getting some questions about um, some specific feed additives, which I'm not going to address at this time. Again, I think that might be a little advanced for what we are looking at with this kind of general help session. But if you do want to go ahead and schedule a telehealth consult, it is up on our website under our services. And I'd be happy to discuss anything specific with you as far as specific additives that you want to add to your fish's diet. And now, question on water changes and amounts or percentages removed. So goldfish are just by their genetics, messy, messy little critters. So they do not do well with feed to mass conversion. So essentially that means that a lot of what they take in is just going to come out the back end. So again, that's why we kind of stick with that low protein diet. Your water change percentage is really going to depend on two things in your water chemistry. So it comes down to your nitrates and your pH and your KH, or your carbonate alkalinity. Obviously, the more fish you have crammed into a smaller volume of water, the more frequently you'll have to do water changes. Now, we've had some owners, try to skimp on the diet and not feed that much to keep their water chemistry appropriate, but really that's not fair to your fish. Your fish really deserves to have good, clean water, and be fed appropriately. And if you can't keep them in that space, you're going to have to get them a bigger house or find someone else that can adopt them. Um, it really depends again on the situation. You never want to, have to starve your fish because you can't keep up with the water changes. Standard, if you just kind of want a baseline to jump off from, we recommend starting with about 10% once a week, 25% every other week. But it's really important that you check your parameters, and that really kind of dictate how often you have to do water changes. So for example, I have a tropical tank downstairs that started with a bunch of rescue fish. So we had 50 gallons for about 12 just standard glow tetras. So these were rescued from one of my clients who had a horrific die-off and just didn't want to look at them anymore. So my practice manager took them first, and then when she moved, I took them. So again, 12, tiny tetras in a 50-gallon tank. I don't have to do water changes that often. I think we were able to get away with about a 25% once a month. And now that we're down to just one little survivor, because he's 9 years old, he's definitely beat the average when it comes to tetra age. We're testing the parameters every once in a while if things start looking suspicious. I mean, I definitely do a water change about once a month, regardless of what it tests as. But it really depends on, what your parameters are testing at. So a question on doing direct water changes and adding conditioner to either the existing tank or the bucket where you're collecting your water. So how municipalities treat their water with either chlorine or chloramine varies quite a bit. Most of them, will test their water regularly for coliforms. So these are harmful bacteria that would obviously be detrimental to us. And then once they hit a certain threshold, they add chlorine, chloramine, and they nuke it all back down. So obviously, when they hit that nuke button, your fish are going to be at the highest risk. Now, how often that happens? No idea. They're not really going to tell you when that's going to be, because they don't know. Really, the safest thing to do to make sure your fish are never exposed is to mix your water separately. So I just get the 5-gallon buckets, fill them up one at a time. I admit it takes a long time, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Again, it depends on if you have the ability to lift a large, heavy bucket of water. Again, we have clients that are older and can't actually lift. So in that case, we recommend that if you are going to fill up, say, directly from a tap, that whatever conditioner that you are adding, you break it up. It'll depend on how much you have to add, depending on the manufacturer and the makeup components. So it'll tell you, how many mils or ounces or teaspoons per how many gallons you're replacing. And then you take that up and divide it into 3. You're going to add a third of it before you start adding. You're going to add a third halfway through, and then you add the third at the final end. So that at least is trying to combat some of the harmful things. But again, it really depends on what you are capable of doing and how your system is set up. So if you want to be completely 100% safe, treat it in a separate bucket. But again, I get it. Water is heavy. That's why I work out and lift all the time, because I'm lifting pretty much water, not so much the fish. So we got a good question about cycling a tank. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this term, essentially this is setting up your nitrogen cycle, which converts the primary fish waste of ammonia into nitrite and then nitrate. So this is done by beneficial bacteria that live pretty much all over your tank. And there's a lot of products on the market that are going to instantly start your tank. Well, I'm sorry, we've tried a lot of them. Again, we're going to try another published study this summer, and none of them worked. They've done other studies that there's barely anything alive in these containers. So I really wouldn't try, using some of those quick start products that are out there. You can try, artificially increasing the ammonia yourself and using some of those products to get things started. But with biologic filters and bacteria, it's never going to be one particular species that does all the heavy lifting. I mean, biologic colonies in aquariums are varied. And a lot of these products are going to bring one, maybe two, maybe three if you're lucky. And they're it has to have a lot of things line up, a particular water chemistry, especially the pH. Some of those, cultivated colonies are great at a pH of 7. But here in California, if you have a pH of 8, 8.5 all the time, you're just going to, the bacteria are going to die as soon as you throw them in there. So what I recommend is usually the well, I think it's the easiest, but again, it's not one of those quick fix. I'm more for the let's set this up for the long haul success. Is starting with a very low bioload. So if say you're going to get, a tank of 10 goldfish, let's start with 2 and let them settle in, let them get everything, you're going to test your ammonia, your nitrite, your trait. You're going to see those little spikes as things are getting acclimated, and then we're slowly going to add more. And again, after every time you add goldfish, you're going to have a little spike in your nitrogen parameters, and that is completely normal. But you do your water changes, you stay on top of it, and by the time you get to 10 goldfish, everyone's going to be happy. Again, provided that you actually have a tank large large enough to look at 10 goldfish. For goldfish, we're really recommending at least 20 to 50 gallons per fish. I mean, again, all fish start small. Even those koi that get up to 3 feet long. At one time, they were an inch long. And if you put a cute little tiny fish in a tiny tank, they're not going to grow to the size of their container. I'm sorry, that's also another myth. You've basically just stunted them, which isn't fun for any animal. But giving those goldfish, 20 to 50 gallons, they can grow into it. Yes, they'll have lots of room to swim, but it's really the best thing to set them up for complete and total success. Um, Sorry, just trying to catch up on these questions that are coming down. Unfortunately, I only have a few more minutes. So question about dechlorinator having an expiration date. I have talked to the companies. They claim they do not have one. Again, are they going to tell you how exactly that dechlorinator is made and what's in it? No. So unfortunately, that's going to be a little hard to determine. Obviously, you can test this very simply yourself with a simple chlorine test kit. Basically, you test your tap water before, look, it's got chlorine in it. You add your conditioner, you test it again, no chlorine. It's a little bit simpler, simple done that way. So last question. Goldfish have no stomachs, okay to feed every time you pass the tank or need to schedule feeding. Um, it's really going to depend on your fish. They recognize you, they see you as their meal ticket. But obviously, remember, if you're going to be feeding little meals throughout the day, it's got to be a little tiny bit. And again, depending on your pellet size, your fish size, this might be, 1 pellet at a time, maybe 2, maybe 3. Again, it depends on the diet. There's some really tiny pellets out there. And if you have this giant goldfish, I mean, it'll definitely give them something to do, getting down in there. And, again, that normal foraging behavior gives them something to do. So they're not sitting there bored all day. But yeah, I mean, some fish like their routines, but I'm pretty sure they like food more. So thank you everyone for joining me today. Goldfish have just been the theme of the week, and I really love working with them. So thank you very much for everyone for joining us today. Again, if you do have specific questions and want to, let me just pull up our online consult real quick. If you do want to have a specific either dietary breakdown or any sort of water quality issues that you've been having that you really want to make sure are taken care of, I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. So if anybody wants to ask more detailed questions, again, we've had somebody asking about some specific additives, which is fine. A lot of the products that we're seeing on the market don't have a lot of scientific studies behind them, at least not in goldfish. Maybe in some fish, maybe in some other animals. A lot of what we've taken from nutrition in fish is just extrapolated from our aquaculture species. But thankfully, there's a lot of carp that are aquacultured that are very similar to goldfish. So I hope you all have a lovely week, and we'll be seeing you again next month, all about koi, the happy big cousin of the goldfish.